And let me start by echoing Leslie's welcome to conference. So we are the Pensions and Lifetime Savings Association, and as the Pensions and Lifetime Savings Association, we have a quite straightforward mission. It's to help everyone achieve a better income in their retirement. So no surprise that I'm going to kick off the conference challenge today by talking about the current prospects for retirement incomes. I'm going to try and paint a picture of what prospects look like now so that we can start to get a read on what that better retirement income might look like. When we talk about incomes in retirement, we tend to use the language of adequacy. What we tend to do is measure people's actual or prospective retirement incomes against some objective marker of an adequate income. Let's start by looking at the ways in which adequacy can be measured. There are two principal approaches. I think it's fair to say that neither is perfect because people's lives are much more complex than our capacity to model them. But using one or both of these methods is pretty much essential if we're to understand how the nation's retirement prospects are shaping up. First, there's what's called replacement rates. These express income in retirement as a proportion of an individual's income before retirement. A two-thirds final salary pension is, of course, a very good example of the use of a replacement rate. Replacement rates have perhaps got less useful, though, as the lines between pre-retirement and retirement have blurred, and in particular as pensions freedoms open up the opportunity for people to take their retirement income at a variety of different times and in a variety of different shapes. But replacement rates are pretty much essential if you want a measure which captures differences across the income distribution, if you want a measure which allows for people being able to maintain something approaching their own previous lifestyle when they hit retirement. The second approach to measuring adequacy are flat income standards, which compare an individual's retirement income with some objective society-wide standard. So this standard might be constructed through a budgeting exercise. It might be made by comparing pensioner incomes with those of the rest of the population. It might be pitched at a level intended to avoid poverty, or it might be pitched at some higher level representing perhaps a comfortable or a happy existence in retirement. The research we're undertaking at the moment uses both approaches. Specifically, it combines an update of the replacement rates which were used in the Pensions Commission's report and a minimum income standard for pensioners which is devised and updated by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. So if we start to look at what that might mean in practice in terms of how we're defining adequacy across the income distribution. So lower down the income scale, it's relatively easy to hit a replacement rate target, which is set at 80%. State pension does almost all of the work for you. But at the same time, people who've been struggling for income while in work are likely to fall below a minimum income standard in retirement too. As we move further across the income distribution, it's much more likely, of course, that people will meet the minimum income standard but be at risk of falling short of their more personal replacement rate target. So by the time you're earning £33,000, to take an example, relatively straightforward to get £10,000 of retirement income. If you take a replacement rate approach, you need something just in excess of £20,000. It is asserted in order to maintain your previous lifestyle. And off the right of this picture, target replacement rates fall away to about 50% of pre-retirement income. And in fact, in practice, you very quickly get to a place where you can't actually fund your target replacement income within a lifetime allowance of 1 million. But that's a debate for another day. Before I start to talk about some of our findings, I want to go back to the Pensions Commission and refresh our memories on what exactly the architects of automatic enrolment set out to achieve. So stage one was about ensuring a base load of income provided by the state. Round about 30% for a median earner from a combination of basic state pension and state second pension, as was. Stage two was to strongly encourage, through automatic enrolment and the harnessing of inertia, people to build up some private pension savings on top of that through what then was called the NPSS, the National Pension Savings Scheme. And the intention of that bit was to make sure that everybody, in addition to the state pension, had enough income to lift them out of poverty. Stage 3 was to enable, no more than enable people to top up that default saving with more of their own. So having automatically enrolled people into the MPSS at a default rate of contributions, they would then be enabled, empowered to contribute more if they wanted to make that difference up to their target replacement rate of 2/3 for the median earner. So automatic enrolment, at least in its first phase, was never designed to get the typical saver to the adequacy targets set by the Pensions Commission. Something that I think sometimes gets lost in translation, gets lost in our collective memories, and it's overtaken by a rush to criticise what some portray as woefully inadequate contribution levels. Let's move on to how that picture is actually working in practice. And I'm just going to scratch the surface here of some analysis we'll be publishing next month. We've asked the Pensions Policy Institute to segment the employed population into some 900 odd segments, and we've taken a representative individual from each of those segments and fed them through a model from Hyman's Robertson called Guided Outcomes, which gives us a read on their likely retirement outcomes. So let's take one of those segments as an example. It's the catchily titled segment 66, who's better described as women in the millennials generation, typically in intermediate jobs, earning a bit below median, and crucially experiencing pension saving for the first time. People who are pretty much the core of the target market for automatic enrolment, pretty much the archetype of Generation DC, if you like. What does our modelling tell us about this group of women? They have a target replacement rate of 75%. That's a little bit higher than the median earner that I showed you earlier, because the less you earn, the higher your target replacement rate is as a proportion. In other words, they need to produce about £13,000 to £14,000 of retirement income in today's terms to hit that target. Now the state pension, obviously now a single state pension rather than the two components in the Pensions Commission's analysis, gets them a huge amount of the way there. 42% in this analysis. Saving at 8% of band earnings, which through automatic enrolment we assume they will do, eats up over half of the gap actually and gets them up to about 62%. Which leaves a relatively modest gap over on the right-hand side for them to fill between what automatic enrolment puts them on track to achieve and what they might want or need to achieve in order to maintain their standard of living into retirement. Now, three broad conclusions stand out for me from this brief analysis of future adequacy. Firstly, the state pension is very, very important for this group. Even though they're by no means poor, it's a huge part of their future retirement prospects. Secondly, automatic enrolment, as it stands, is set to do broadly the job it was set up to do. One important caveat to that, of course, we've assumed that women in this group won't stop contributing as their contributions increase fivefold over the next couple of years. And that phasing process and savers' reactions to it is one we need to watch very, very carefully indeed. Third conclusion, the gap for people in this age group at least feels perhaps more manageable than we might think. Just to put that gap another way and to think about the only thing that really matters in the work we do, the amount of money people have to spend when they come to retire. State pension gives you roughly £20 a day, a little bit more than that. Workplace pension with 8% of band earnings going in from your mid-20s gives you roughly another £10. The gap is little more than £5 a day. It's actually about £6.40. So it's not a huge chasm we're talking about in terms of the potential aspirations of certainly younger people. There's a gap and it's material, but let's not overstate it. And that gap, in a nutshell, is our conference challenge. Where and how do we help people find that missing fibre? Now, I've got some pretty strong ideas. I know you out in the audience will do too. My coaches who are going to join me on stage soon certainly do. Hell, we've even got Lenny Henry coming on Friday to tell us how Shakespeare would answer the question. But we also thought it would be worth asking some people with rather more skin in the game. We started that process last night.
I work at PwC, and we are a consultancy firm based up in London Bridge.
I work at the National Theatre and I'm the technical coordinator.
I work in property management, so we manage apartment blocks, commercial units, new build housing estates for leaseholders. So we just manage all the communal areas, making sure everything's running smoothly.
So I work in Manchester for a property company in the admin department. Look after the staff because they can't look after themselves. So yeah, just the general stuff, make sure the office is all up to date, the CRM systems, make sure all the clients are all good.
So I work in a nursery as a secretary. So I'm like the first point of contact at the nursery, so I deal with all the parents and phone calls and emails and all of the administration duties, like managing all the accounts, all the money that comes in, all the money that goes out, paying invoices and dealing with difficult parents and dealing with lovely parents as well.
I would say that my guilty pleasure for spending money is probably on nice meals out. Expensive meals out, unfortunately, because you have nothing to show for it apart from a big waistline.
My guilty pleasure would probably be going out too much, socialising and shopping.
Food in general. I love food. Not just normal everyday shopping food, but restaurants and taking the wife out, I think, at different places.
Guilty pleasure, in terms of money, I spend a lot. I spend a lot too much, potentially, on nights out and things like that. Yeah, I go a little bit crazy. I like soul nights, that's probably my guilty pleasure, yeah. Like Motown, worst case, 150. Yeah.
Ooh, I mean, food. Like going out for meals. I do it about 3 or 4 times a week. Especially living in London, there's so many amazing places. So, and ice cream and X Factor.
So the most expensive thing I've ever bought is probably my car, my lovely BMW.
Good question. Most expensive thing? It's probably my car. Yeah. It's a Ford Fiesta. I spent about $2,500 on it, so yeah.
The most expensive thing I've ever bought would probably be my car, and then maybe holidays as second. I went to Mexico this year and it was definitely worth it. It was beautiful.
The most expensive thing I've ever bought is probably been towards a holiday. I bought a holiday. It was travelling through Italy, so that was quite expensive.
Well, I don't drive, so it's not a car. It's like a holiday, can I say that? A holiday. That's all my money goes on holidays. Like when I save, it's for a holiday. But now I'm getting older, I'm like, I need to start saving for the future. Yeah.
So that's a brief introduction to Team Gregg, one of the teams for our challenge. We met them last night, we met them again at lunchtime today, and I can safely say they are all fired up and ready to go. They'll be working with Gregg McClymont to help us answer some fundamental questions over the next 2 to 3 days. Do they recognise a gap in their potential retirement income? Do they care when they do recognise it? If they recognise it, do they have a feel for how much it might cost to fill it? Whose responsibility do they think it is to fill it? And most importantly of all, I think, what can we, the Pensions and Lifetime Savings Association, do to help? because that is, after all, our job. And do you know what? I genuinely have no idea at all what they're going to say, which is a little bit scary for me and the many other people who are helping me to run this challenge, but it's also pretty exciting and I think likely to be insightful. Because no matter how strong, no matter how good our modelling and analysis, there's really no substitute for listening to people who are in the thick of it, outside pensions, looking in, only occasionally looking in, more often in fact worrying about job security, about housing costs, about debt, about the difficulty of saving for anything at all. Some of the more mundane things you heard there, thinking about how they're going to afford their next meal out. Let's meet our second team.
We deal in distribution. We've got 14 depots up and down the UK. We import and export basically not British meat. We bring it into the UK and we distribute it to the likes of P&O, all the big ship liners and all the local Costco's.
I work for Spire Healthcare, a private chain of hospitals in the UK. Answering the phone, dealing with patients face to face, so a mixture of both really.
I work for British Red Cross in Manchester, the fast aid training department, so we sort of arrange training for companies, corporate organisations.
I work in London for a business outsourcing company. In my role, I work as an administrator, supporting senior management.
So I work in the events company for aviation, so we plan events all over the world for airlines and airports to plan new routes. They have offices in London, New York, Amsterdam, and then we're in Manchester.
I probably spend the majority of my money at the moment on nights out, short weekends away, probably too much on alcohol and probably too much on food as well.
Clothes, shopping, makeup, fashion.
Shopping, clothes, shoes, handbags.
I'll say this, and I hope no one else is going to see this, clothes. I do too much clothes shopping and I just can't keep away from clothes.
Yeah, I spend money on loads of things, like I do a lot of online shopping and I like designer clothes as well. I like loads of brands, Hugo Boss, Armani, Calvin Klein, Ted Baker, Zara, all the top names, Gucci.
The most expensive thing I've ever bought is probably my granddad a car. Yeah, I know, it was a big birthday, so we all chipped in, but I put £1,000 towards it, so that was like, it was only a Vauxhall, but it was brand new. Yeah, and he'd had a crash like sort of 6 months beforehand and then refused to drive again, so he was really upset about that.
That's a tough one because I've just had my braces done. It is because I've had a few things. There's a few things I've had.
I've bought a coat. It was about 250 quid. Still hurts me, but I've got it. I love it. Still in my closet.
Most thing I would say, a Apple laptop, which is about £2,000. I felt a little guilty, but I knew that Apple's a good make, so it's going to last for a long time.
Boob job. Or I've had eye laser surgery. Pair of Louboutins. I could go on all day.
So the most expensive item I've ever bought is a Louis Vuitton handbag, £900, and I don't feel guilty.
So slightly more insight into spending habits than maybe I expected there, but there you go. That's our second team, Team Steve. They are equally fired up and ready to go. Let's ask our expert coaches to come up on stage and we'll talk a little bit, about how it's going to run over the next couple of days. So welcome, and thank you both for taking part in the challenge.
Is what I'm thinking.
Where do we go with this? So you've had a brief chance to meet the contestants earlier today. What's your first impressions?
I'm just going to tell them to stop buying branded stuff and job done, really.
Yeah.
You know?
That answer to the challenge on day one. I like that.
Yeah, I think we can say with some confidence that we're not dealing with shrinking violets. I think our job will be less coaching them than our teams coaching us in the way in which people live their lives these days. And I think for us that's very important to get a handle on as a first step towards understanding how we encourage more saving.
Yeah, I think we've all already learned quite a bit about how millennials live their life, different to us. I learned last night, for example, about a night out in Liverpool which combines bingo with a rave. It's called Bongo's Bingo, and apparently it's a sellout every week. So you won't be able to get there tomorrow night instead of the gala dinner, so don't try. What's your thoughts on how you might approach the challenge? In a spirit of cooperation or a spirit of competition? Or
I think my own view is the most important thing actually is to facilitate these younger people, if that's the best way to describe their view of the world and where savings and pensions does or doesn't, as things stand, fit into that world. And really as a facilitator of those world views. It's very easy for us, of course, in the industry to deal in charts and numbers and averages, but actually to have a sense of how people live their lives now and how we have to work around that rather than try and say that it's our way or the highway.
And I think for me, Graham, it's about not telling people off, not making them guilty, not wagging the finger, not making them feel they ought to do something and they're delinquent if they don't. It's actually harnessing what they're excited about and positive about and trying to get pensions somehow into that mindset. Because I think too often government, terrible bunch, industry kind of points the finger at people and tells them off and makes them feel bad, and I don't think there's any evidence that actually that generates the right outcomes.
And having seen these guys, I don't think that would work anyway. And they're pretty confident in the way that they live their lives. And two fuddy-duddies like us coming along and telling them how it should be, I don't think is likely to be an effective approach.
So we'll kind of know if one of the teams comes up with, I don't know, defined ambition as the answer. But there might be a bit more subtle influence from our two coaches. How are you going to make sure that it's their answers that come through, not yours?
I'm already worried that we're corrupting them. While we're sitting here, they're having a training session on pensions. And I think we've got to get to them quickly before they start not thinking like the way all their mates at work think. Try and get their impressions before we say, oh no, it's not like that, it's different. So fortunately, it'll take more than 2.5 hours to get them completely indoctrinated, but we've got to get there quick, I think.
I mean, these are ambitious people that want to get on in their life. So I think it's listening to their hopes and fears and ambitions and working out how encouraging greater saving fits into those hopes, dreams and ambitions.
Yeah.
So I think the first step is actually listening rather than prescribing. And I think maybe the harder part is how do you construct some possibilities about encouraging greater saving which fit in with the way that people live their lives these days.
And I mean, just this morning we met them for the first time and I said, so tell me who provides, because they've all been auto-enrolled or are members of workplace pensions, who is your pension with? And 2 of them knew and 3 of them didn't. So they didn't even know who provides their pension. One of them said, yes, I hear from my provider, which wasn't Royal London, sadly, but I hear from my provider quite a lot and, they are a good dialogue. But it's interesting, several of them didn't even know, there was no sense of relationship at all with the provider.
Yeah, we spoke about the stone roses. We haven't got anywhere near pensions yet.
much more productive place to start. What will you be doing with them this afternoon when we've wrapped up here?
Well, I've promised them a short written test on what they've done so far. No, I mean, we've got a fairly tight schedule. So each day that we're in the hall, we'll be kind of like reporting back on what's already gone on. So we'll be finding out what they've done this afternoon, planning tomorrow morning's the really heavy session, some filming tomorrow afternoon, then we'll be back for 5 minutes tomorrow afternoon saying what's going on. Then there's a big pitch Friday morning, so we want you in there voting for Team Steve, because we will have the best ideas.
As you might have noticed, Steve is very, very keen to win this challenge. may not have escaped your attention.
And what's the first thing you'll say to them when you go back and meet them this afternoon?
I think I'll be interested in trying to get a sense of that when I use the word pension or long-term savings or whatever, if what I understand by that word is the same as team members understand. Mm-hmm. Because unless there's a shared understanding, then going forward it's probably quite difficult to have a really useful conversation. I mean, I see it more as a dialogue than anything else. I'm very keen to understand better, how this generation thinks about the world. So I think a first step to that is make sure we're speaking the same language. Mm-hmm. So that's probably one thing to start with.
And the other thing that struck me is, because they're sort of late 20s, early 30s age group, I said to them, tell me about your grandparents and how old they are. And so I think of my mum and dad in their 80s, and and my mother-in-law was in her 90s kind of thing. And for them, actually, 70-something seems quite old because that's their grandparents. And many of the people who make policy are actually all from pretty much the same generation. Mm-hmm. And therefore, we make all sorts of assumptions. And actually, for these guys, 70 seems pretty old. Yeah, and I think cracking open some of those assumptions over the next couple of days is going to be really valuable. I'm really delighted that you've agreed to join us and captain the two teams. I think it's going to help make for a great contest over the next couple of days. As Steve said, they're away now being immersed in a bit of pensions knowledge. They're going to be doing much more work with their coaches and with people from my team this afternoon and throughout tomorrow. And we'll have an update back here tomorrow afternoon around 5 o'clock.
So you all enjoyed your dinner. Who here has actually thought at all about how much you need to save for a pension to have a good retirement? Anybody thought about that? No. Emily? No?
It feels too far away to think about that.
Yeah, still a long way off. So what would you say if I told you that all the experts say the amount you really need to save for a decent pension in retirement is £600,000? No.
Are you serious?
Absolutely serious. And that's what we're going to be talking about in more detail over the next couple of days.
So that was our very own James Walsh making small talk over coffee last night. But I expect there'll be several of those sort of penny drop moments over the next 24 hours or so. And do please come back here tomorrow at 5:15 to join us and find out how the teams are getting on. That kind of wraps up this session for now. And I'll hand over to Joanne Seegers and Independent State Pension Age Reviewer John Cridland for our next session. Please join me though in thanking our two coaches.
Thank you.